Isolated, exposed, a lens staring back with cold indifference. She stood there entirely alone, no high-tech studio, no professional co-anchor, and no teleprompter scrolling with someone else's scripted thoughts. Just a grieving daughter, stripped of her media persona, speaking into a camera on the most sacred morning of the entire Christian calendar. What she delivered was nothing like the public expected. This was not a standard plea to a kidnapper or some dry, legally vetted corporate statement. It was not a psychological collapse, though you could observe her fighting for composure with every labored breath and every heavy word. Her message was infinitely more complex, a deeply layered confession that, for those paying close attention, mapped out exactly where Savannah Guthrie's mind is residing and what she truly believes has happened to her mother. While the general public watched and wept, a small circle of observers watched and took notes. Today, we are focusing on those hidden details. Before we dissect the weight of her words, you must grasp the immense pressure of this specific moment in the timeline. Today is Easter Sunday, April 5th, 2026. Nancy Guthrie has been vanished from the face of the earth for 63 days. There are no arrests, no credible sightings, and no named suspects. Nancy is just gone. And tomorrow, Monday, April 6th, Savannah is scheduled to return to Studio 1A at the Today Show for the first time since her mother disappeared into the Arizona shadows. Unless you have worked in the pressure cooker of live morning television, it is hard to fathom the physical and emotional toll of that return. She will be awake before 4 a.m., sitting through hair and makeup before facing millions of viewers. Yet at 6 a.m., the previous evening, rather than resting or mentally preparing for the most vulnerable professional milestone of her life, she sat down to record a video. It was not for the network or a press gallery, but for a specific congregation, Good Shepherd, New York. This Manhattan church is a community Savannah introduced her mother to a decade ago, a place known for a robust digital presence that connects worshipers from across the globe to its Sunday liturgy. And this is the specific detail that changes the entire context of this message. Nancy Guthrie was not just some passive viewer watching Good Shepherd from a sofa in Tucson. Every single Sunday, she would host a dedicated group of friends at a neighbor's house in her Catalina Foothills neighborhood to experience the service as a community. It was a sacred weekly anchor, a rhythmic routine for a circle of women who showed up for their faith and each other, without fail until the Sunday when Nancy's seat remained empty. When she failed to arrive at her friend's home for that virtual service on the morning of February 1st, her inner circle knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. The alarm was raised immediately. Annie, Savannah's sister, and her husband, Tommaso Cian, rushed to investigate the house. They discovered the unlocked door, the physical evidence of violence, and called the authorities. That Sunday service is where this nightmare began. Now, 63 days later, Savannah is reaching out to that very same digital flock on Easter morning. On the eve of her return to the spotlight, she delivers a message that stands as one of the most psychologically intricate and revealing statements ever recorded by a family member in a high-profile missing persons investigation. Let us analyze the transcript. Good morning, everyone. Happy Easter. And truly, Easter is meant to be happy. It represents lilies and soft colors and new life. It is the season of sunlight, optimism, and the promise of second chances and fresh starts. For those of us who hold this faith, it is the pinnacle of the year. Even more significant than the nativity or the crucifixion is the resurrection, the transition into an eternal state of being. That is the cornerstone of our belief. His triumph over the grave serves as a blueprint for our own. Today, we celebrate the hope of a life that bypasses the finality of death. But as I stand here, I must confess that there are moments when that divine promise feels agonizingly out of reach. Times when the act of living feels far more punishing than the concept of death. These are seasons of profound spiritual frustration, the suffocating feeling of being totally forsaken. Most people will eventually face a dark night of the soul where these emotions dominate. In our faith, we are told to find solace in the idea that Jesus, during his time on earth, navigated every spectrum of human suffering, that by becoming flesh and blood, he was not some detached deity watching our agony, but a participant in it. Recently, however, in my own wilderness of grief, I have found myself doubting. I have questioned if Jesus truly understood this specific, jagged wound I carry. This uniquely cruel torture of the unknown, the psychological void of uncertainty, and the silence of answers being held back. In my most desolate hours, I have harbored the bitter, perhaps even heretical thought that I have found a suffering Jesus never had to endure. After all, do the scriptures not say that Jesus was fully aware of his own path and his ultimate sacrifice and return? His followers were confused, but he possessed clarity. He understood exactly what his end would be. While it caused him such immense dread that he sweat blood in the Garden of Gethsemane, the fact remains, he knew. The ending was scripted. He knew the cross preceded the crown. For a long time, I assumed he never felt this void, this agonizing state of not knowing. It isn't a sin to harbor these thoughts, to interrogate the heavens with our doubts. The Creator doesn't demand we be emotionless statues or masters of pain, hiding behind hollow slogans about how the most brutal wars are reserved for his elite soldiers. Our accusations toward the sky, the way we grapple with the silence of God, that is where he moves. It is through that jagged, raw vulnerability that a breach finally opens in our perception, allowing a flood of sudden clarity. That was my path. This gateway began to swing wide as I stared at a desert sunset that burned with a brightness that felt like a mockery of my own internal wreckage. Without warning, the tomb flooded my mind. 3 days of cold, dead silence. No one really talks about that interim. We fixate on Easter Sunday. Of course we do. We fast forward to the light and the triumph of the morning. We do honor the bloodletting of Friday, sitting in the shadows of a flickering candle during that first pitch-black night. But after the breath left his lungs, what did he actually perceive? Even on the wood, he screamed into the sky, wondering why the heavens had gone silent. That is the sound of a man drowning in questions, not answers. Where does a spirit drift during those hollow hours of the interim? What was he thinking? Did he believe the darkness would last 2 days or 2,000 years? In that grave, did his agony feel like a static, infinite loop? The psychological weight of the unknown can make a single moment feel like an eternity. Perhaps he knew that terror after all. As humans, we are all currently trapped in that same agonizing pause, suspended in a permanent state of limbo. Not 3 days, but thousands of years between his sacrifice and our final rise. Our belief system provides a desperate conviction that a second birth is coming, that this trauma isn't for nothing, and every scar will be healed. But we exist in the meantime. A cruel, visceral stretch defined by being lost, discarded, and left entirely behind. Our only mercy is the thought that the divine once wore human skin and felt this exact same desolation. That he witnesses our struggle and offers a quiet, steady presence instead of a quick, superficial fix. He pledges to stay beside those who are falling apart, a strange, soft gravity that keeps us from drifting into the void. Maybe this message is a bit too bleak for a Sunday morning, but I have long believed that we miss the point of the triumph if we refuse to stare directly into the eyes of loss and inevitable extinction. The light only burns this bright because the shadows were so thick. The sunrise is beautiful only because we were starving. It is more radiant because it is so desperately required. So I stand here today, eyes shut tight, and I let the heat hit my face. I envision a reality where the divide between here and the hereafter finally dissolves. That is the core of this whole ritual. I am standing in that light too, I still believe. And so I tell you with everything I have. Happy Easter. It usually starts with soft focus tropes, spring flowers and pastel colors, and the usual cliches of hope. It is safe, comfortable territory. But Savannah Guthrie does not play by the usual rules. She is a master of the airwaves, a broadcaster who has spent 30 years carving out narratives with the precision of a scalpel on national television. She has also stepped into a new arena as a published writer on the subject of belief. Her book, Mostly What God Does, which explores finding grace in the wreckage, became a massive #1 bestseller in 2024. This is a woman who has interrogated her own soul in public, documenting the mechanics of her faith. So, when her tone suddenly shifts gears, you can feel the air leave the room. She admits that, standing there today, there are moments where the grand promise feels like a flickering, distant light, when life itself feels far harder than death. Let that sink in. She is not just providing a commentary on grief. Grief is a destination, a terrible, finite place where the healing process can eventually begin to take root. What she is describing is a psychological prison, the airless, crushing weight of not knowing, of being caught between two worlds. The the one where your mother is still alive out there, and the one you refuse to speak into existence. That phrase, far harder than death, is not something you workshop with a publicist or a focus group. That is the raw testimony of someone who has spent the 3 a.m. hour weighing two terrifying outcomes in the dark. It sounds like a woman who is still in the trenches, still fighting against an unthinkable reality. Then she pivots to something intellectually sharp and emotionally gut-wrenching. She admits to interrogating the divine. She confesses that in her lowest moments, she wondered if the Savior himself ever felt that same abandonment. The silence doesn't just sit there. It eats at you, creating a jagged wound where answers are weaponized and cruelly withheld. Then she pivots to a theological point that hits like a physical blow. In the scriptures, Jesus understood his final destination. He explicitly warned his followers about his impending death and rebirth. He possessed the full blueprint, even as it completely shattered him. He anticipated the agony, yet he saw the restoration ahead. He wept literal blood in the garden, suffocating under the weight of his future. But despite the pain, he knew the finale. Savannah describes this realization as bitter, her choice of words, sharp and remarkably unforgiving. She felt she'd discovered a unique torment unknown even to Christ, the airless, infinite torture of not knowing the end. Process that for a moment. This is a woman of established, deeply rooted, and very public Christian conviction and faith. She authored a New York Times bestseller centered on her devotion, yet here she stands, framed by a clinical digital lens. In the same virtual sanctuary where her mother appeared every Sunday, she admits to a grief so surgical and predatory. It is a pain so profoundly human she wondered if God himself was a stranger to it. This is not some performance. This is a soul speaking without a filter, revealing the raw, unvarnished darkness she has inhabited for 63 days straight. Then comes the turn, the pivot. This entire narrative has been spiraling toward. She descends back into the cold silence of the tomb. She notes that we rarely linger there. We rush toward Easter, skipping ahead to the resurrection. But what about the hollow middle? What about those 3 days buried in the earth, between the execution and the rise? What lived in Jesus' mind during that blackness? How long did he expect to remain in that void? Was it a day, a week, or an entire millennium of silence? Did that suffering feel boundless? When he screamed from the wood, "My God, why have you abandoned me?" Did that scream feel eternal? Was that the shout of a man who saw the finish line, or someone dangling over the abyss of the unknown? She offers a terrifying answer. Maybe he did understand that void. Listen to what she is truly saying beneath the religious veneer. She is recounting 63 days inside her own personal sepulcher, unsure if a resurrection even exists on the other side of this nightmare. She labels this state the meantime. It is her personal phrase for this period of agonizing, indefinite suspension. The meantime is a brutal, grinding gear. It is the friction where faith either holds firm or finally, inevitably snaps. After 8 minutes of documented spiritual unraveling, where her beliefs were tested not by facts, but by a deafening, predatory silence. She confessed her resentment toward the divine, mapping out the forensic architecture of her own internal collapse with clinical precision. Then, she whispers 3 words that defy everything. I still believe. 3 words after the wreckage. I still believe. Happy Easter. Think about the sheer willpower required to say that and mean it after finding blood staining your own front porch. After seeing a masked gunman on a doorbell feed, after receiving ransom demands for cryptocurrency with deadlines that dissolved into nothing, after realizing the lead detective has only 2 years on the job and the local sheriff is fighting for his professional life, after 63 days of silence since her mother was snatched in the dead of night, wearing only pajamas without her life-saving medication. This isn't some decorative sentiment for a Sunday service. This is a declaration of war against the darkness trying to swallow her. Now, we need to address tomorrow, because her decision to walk back onto that set is being dangerously undervalued by the media. Live broadcasting is a specific, merciless form of exposure that terrifies even the veterans when their emotional walls are crumbling. There is no safety net, no edit button, no do-overs. The lens is hot, and the clock is ticking in real time. The camera is active, millions are staring, and your body, your traumatized, vibrating body, might not follow the professional script. That exhausted, grief-heavy frame often betrays the stoic, professional mask you are desperately trying to project to a waiting world. Savannah recognizes this danger better than anyone. She has forged her entire existence within the high-stakes pressure cooker of live television. She knows exactly how a camera exposes raw, unresolved grief, which makes her actions today feel calculated on every imaginable level. Taping that Easter address controlled, paced, measured wasn't just a favor for her congregation, it was something much more strategic. It wasn't just a heartfelt contribution to a service she loves, it was a calibration, a way to steady the compass. She was quietly testing her own voice, checking to see if it would crack under the atmospheric weight of her trauma. She had to know if she could hold it together before facing millions tomorrow morning, standing on a high wire without any net. Today, the answer was yes. But whether that composure holds at 6 a.m. tomorrow under the bright lights and expectations remains unknown. Surrounded by the colleagues who have shielded her for months in the studio that has been her professional anchor for a decade, that remains an open, bleeding question that only time can settle. What we know for certain is that she is returning. Her network representatives confirmed the move. Her motivation is blunt and singular, keeping Annie's name burning in the minds of millions. Every single morning, that broadcast is the most lethal investigative weapon she has left in her arsenal to find the truth. Grief can be a cage, or it can be a weapon. This isn't a woman surrendering to sorrow. This is a woman who's decided that while she's still breathing and functional, she will leverage every single platform until her mother is home. And looking at what is and isn't moving the needle in this search, we must address the systemic cracks that won't stop widening. The primary investigator handed Nancy's file had exactly 2 years of homicide experience when the clock started. 2 years for a case exploding across international headlines, drawing in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Border Patrol assets, and cutting-edge genealogy experts, alongside hundreds of boots on the ground moving in unison. Yet, reports indicate that this lead investigator was frequently absent from the daily tactical briefings as the case unfolded. The specific reasons for this are still a mystery to the public, but in a web this dense with thousands of tips and multiple agencies swapping urgent intelligence while labs churn through forensic evidence, skipping these meetings creates massive blind spots. Those gaps in communication lead to a total breakdown in coordination. In a missing persons hunt, that negligence costs the one thing you can't get back: time. The sergeant running the homicide unit is a longtime veteran of the Pima County Sheriff's Department in Batizon Lown, total years on the force, but when it comes to actually supervising murder investigations, he was another fresh face. A police insider speaking to News Nation under the heaviest shroud of anonymity claims this specific sergeant had never actually spearheaded a single homicide case himself before being tapped to run the entire unit. Sheriff Nanos has been loud and aggressive in his defense of the team. He points to 2 specific victories: the Reddington and Goodwill murders, both of which were shut tight within 72 hours. That track record is worth noting, certainly. But here's the pushback from the old guard of law enforcement, the question that refuses to die and the sheriff refuses to address. Where are the veterans? When a case of this gravity hits the violent snatching of an 84-year-old woman, the mother of a household name network journalist, taken right from a quiet neighborhood, wired with cameras, standard operating procedure at the 80.N, top tier of policing dictates throwing every weapon in the arsenal at it. That means calling the retired, the old wolves, the detectives who've stared down these exact shadows for decades and have that bone-deep instinct for exactly what those first frantic hours require. The system for this already exists. Retired deputies and seasoned detectives can be sworn back in as consultants. You take that massive engine of experience and plug it directly into a green department that is currently drowning in a sea of pressure and scale it has never seen before. Sources close to the heart of this investigation say that call never went out, not even when the search hit its peak with 400 officers scouring the earth. That's a choice that's becoming impossible to justify. Now, Nanos is staring down a formal recall campaign from Pima County residents who have watched this search flatline for more than 60 days without a single name being whispered as a suspect. Then, there's the airport scandal brought before the Board of Supervisors by a local citizen, backed up by an official incident report from Fox News Digital. On November 6th, 2024 months before Nancy vanished, Sheriff Nanos walked into Tucson International Airport with a hot weapon in his carry-on. 5 rounds sat in the magazine, with 1 more live round in the chamber. A TSA agent saw the silhouette on the X-ray. Nanos was led to a room where his Miranda rights were recited, by the book. He wasn't cuffed. He wasn't charged. Instead, he was walked back to his car to lock up the gun, then cleared to rebook and fly out. Now, federal law does allow sworn officers to fly commercial with their sidearms, but only if they follow a very strict paper trail. You need advance written notice for the airline and TSA, signed forms, and pre-flight coordination. If you haven't checked every box before you hit the terminal, that loaded gun has no legal business being in your bag. The citizen who flagged this at the meeting kept it simple. If any regular person had done the exact same thing, the consequences would have been violently different. Does a loaded gun at an airport change the facts of Nancy Guthrie's case? Likely not, but it feeds a much deeper, more toxic rot. The public's trust in the very leadership they are counting on to find Nancy is dissolving, and when trust vanishes, the flow of information dies with it. It affects the tips coming in. It kills cooperation. It weakens the communal roar that keeps a case alive when the trail goes cold. So where are we today? What is the one lever left to pull? For most investigators, the answer is DNA. And here is why that's the final hope. Forensic teams pulled a partial profile from inside Nancy's house. The genetic signature, is a phantom. It matches neither the victim nor anyone with a legitimate reason to have crossed that threshold. Leading the effort is the head of genetic genealogy at Parabon, the Virginia forensic lab famous for resurrecting cases long considered permanently dead. She has described the potentially overlapping nature of this biological evidence as a factor that makes her feel incredibly optimistic. Finding mixed DNA where a violent struggle occurred, as the blood at the doorway suggests, is a significant tactical breakthrough. This aligns with a killer leaving traces behind during the violence, a biological map that can be scrutinized once the sequence is complete. The process hunts for distant kin of the unknown individual through ancestral databases, potentially flagging someone like a third cousin. From an uncle to a half-sibling, the circle tightens systematically until a name emerges. This is not guesswork, it is a mathematical trap. This precise scientific roadmap is exactly how the Golden State Killer was finally unmasked after 4 decades of evade and escape. It is the same technological net that ensnared Brian Kohberger following the 2022 murders at the University of Idaho. This isn't instant. We are looking at a timeline of months, perhaps more, but when this science lands, it strikes with absolute finality. These findings are immutable. While the lab hums, detectives are still dissecting every frame of the grainy doorbell camera footage. A shadowed figure, roughly 5 feet 9 inches tall, shoulder slumping under an Ozark trail pack from Walmart, remains the primary focus. At precisely 2:12 in the morning, this individual reached for the lens, a deliberate act of sabotage that remains the key visual evidence. Task forces are scouring Walmart records for that specific bag, while walking gun shop floors to identify the weapon caught on camera. They have even attempted to pull a tracking pulse from Nancy's pacemaker. Then, there is the massive weight of the reward. The total has swelled to $1,200,000, $1 million from the family and $100,000 from the FBI. Crime Stoppers added $12,500, joined by Wisconsin lawyer Michael Huppy, who personally put up his own capital. Huppy contributed $100,000 to that pile and voiced a reality this week that deserves the widest possible audience. The longer a mystery runs without resolution, the more likely it becomes that a secret shared in private becomes public knowledge. It might be a late-night confession made to a lover or a reckless, ego-driven boast to the wrong person in a quiet moment. Guilt eventually transmutes into a whisper. That whisper becomes a lead, and that lead inevitably results in an arrest. The history of cases broken through genetic genealogy and the inevitable failure of human secrecy confirms this exact pattern. If you possess a fragment of truth, if you notice someone acting erratically around February 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, or if someone flinched when that masked face began flickering on every screen in the country, the time for silence has ended. Contact the authorities at 1-800-CALL-FBI. The line is open, the reward is active, and your identity is legally shielded. Let's revisit that moment on Easter Sunday, a solitary woman standing before a camera, stripped of all pretense. Most viewers saw only the heartbreak, but if you listen to her voice, there was something far more significant than public sorrow. Savannah Guthrie's message was not a breakdown, nor was she playing a part for the morning news cycle. This was a woman who has spent 63 days in a psychological wasteland, now standing tall and staring straight into the lens. She communicated with a sharp clarity. She admitted to questioning God, laying her soul bare for everyone to witness. She spoke without a PR spin or hollow apologies. Her strength didn't come from a resolution or from seeing Nancy return. It wasn't about an arrest or finally putting a name to the monster on her porch. She found it in a defiant act. It was the grueling decision to keep believing while the world offered absolutely no reason to. She goes back to work tomorrow. She isn't clocking back in because the trauma has faded. She returns because as long as this continues, she refuses to be silent. Every time Savannah steps under those lights, Nancy's name stays in front of millions. Every plea keeps the pressure high. That kind of visible resilience creates a suffocating environment for the killer, keeping the public engaged and the possibility of a break alive. It forces the person holding the truth to feel the walls closing in, until the weight of what they know becomes unbearable. The DNA is being decoded, the money is waiting, and somewhere, someone is looking at the man who wore that mask. Nancy Guthrie needs to be brought home, and the person responsible needs to feel the full, crushing gravity of justice. In a world built on genetic blueprints and digital trails, secrets have a shelf life that is rapidly expiring. The truth has a violent way of surfacing. It always finds the light, and when it does, justice will be waiting. Every person who views these images narrows the world for the guilty and expands the hope for a family in pain. We are left to wonder what Savannah's quiet defiance truly signals to the person watching from the shadows. This investigation is not slowing down, it is sharpening, focusing on the moment the mask finally slips. The search continues, the pressure builds, and the pursuit of answers will not stop until the silence is broken.